we have a cat mafia in my neighborhood. Hi, I'm Maddie.
And I'm Abigail, and this is
Two writers.
Many Wrongs. Two writers, many things to unlearn. Today we're talking about those little things that you learn in school or from writing workshops or whatever else that actually end up being really detrimental to the creative writing process. I'm specifically going to be talking about stuff from school and like trying to help my students break away from things like the 5 paragraph essay.
Oh
Um,
God.
yeah, and
I didn't
like,
even think about that.
well, it's hard because the reason why these things exist is because they are great tools, but then teachers and students start using them as if it's the only box that they can live within instead of like a stepping stone to expand your writing. So
Yes.
I'm pretty excited to be talking about this today. But you were saying that there's a pet peeve of yours you were talking to Josh about. What is it?
It's something I see all the time, and I know that it's really a good-natured piece of advice. It's just that I'm on the other side of that advice now, and it
Mm-hmm.
really ticks me off because I never see the next side of it.
Okay.
Which this piece of advice is just make it exist. You can make it good later. I made it
Oh,
exist
yeah.
3 years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been stuck trying to make it good. And
Yeah.
it drives me crazy every time I see that. And it's like, yeah, but then what?
Yeah, I get that. See, and that's another one. I think I agree. It's a very well-intentioned piece of advice. I really do like it. And I have said that to my students because there's that paralysis of
Starting.
the blank page. But you're right. There needs to be that second step of like, you can
Because
make it better later, but
it
how?
feels like that drawing of like, here's how to make a horse. And it's like sketch, and then a
Yes.
little bit of a sketch, and then it's this beautiful formed horse. And it's like there's
Yeah.
steps in between
Yeah.
that we need to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think the reason why nobody talks about them really is because they're so repetitive, because it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you know how to edit, but now you have to go and do it for every page and every chapter and every story. And like, it's a never ending process. I really wish that there was a piece of advice that was more so like, you have to let it go now. Like you have to just move forward, you know? And I think that we get that advice way less than just put something on the page and then you can clean it up later.
Yeah, they make it sound
Hmm.
so easy, and it's really not.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is a really hard one to unlearn. I want to talk a little bit about like when did you start deconstructing some of these things or start unlearning some of these things? Because like I remember and I think I've talked about this on here before, maybe, but I was in, I think it was eighth grade, and they had the FCAT rights, which is the state standardized testing, and you had to, write on a specific topic, whatever. And I wrote the entire thing from the point of view of a dog. And when I told my mom that, my mom was like, they're gonna fucking put you in remedial classes. Like, what did you do? And I ended up getting the highest score that you can get. I got a 6. And it was just one of those moments of like, I had heard my teacher say, the person who's grading this is reading the same essay 200 times from all students across the state. Like, make your essay stand out. And so I did. And I did something that like nobody else really thought about. And that was kind of the first moment of like, oh, the reason I like English is because these rules are meant to be broken. Like in math, you cannot break the fucking rules. You cannot break PEMDAS. You will get the wrong answer. But in English, like if you're good enough, you can break whatever rule you want. And that's always been really appealing to me. When did you start unlearning these things?
I don't really remember like when I was like this FCAT stuff is dumb. I always thought it was dumb, like the way it was so constrictive. I didn't think like this
Oh,
is surely not
absolutely.
the only way. But I don't have a story like that of that
Hmm.
particular moment. But I think like where I started unlearning the stuff that I had learned about like advice people had given me about writing was really like as I started going through the process of finishing a novel and editing a novel, I learned that there's so many things that were wrong.
Hmm.
And I didn't really know it until I like really delved into it. It's
Yeah.
like this is very different. It's very different like learning something than it is
Hmm.
doing something. And so once you're really in it, you start being like, that piece of advice doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
Or even just reading other books and being like, hold on a second. They used an adverb. And this is a New York Times
Hmm.
bestseller. Like all these kinds of things that you,
Right. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. And I think that's the, like, again, going back to it, like, there are these rules of writing, and there are rules that I'm a stickler for. I really do believe that quotations should have punctuation. It drives me crazy when authors decide not to do that. But if you do it well enough, you can break that rule. And like trying to explain to my students that type of thing, because, the students that I'm getting, a lot of them are returning students who haven't been in school for 10, 15 years. And then there's the other portion of them who are 18, 19, fresh out of high school. And in both cases, I find that they're very afraid of English because they think they have to follow this very strict line of rules in order to be successful. And trying to explain to them that English really lives, in the places that we talk, how we communicate with each other. And so, I always say to them, I'm like, if you were to do a 5 paragraph essay, if that is what you're comfortable with, that is a great starting point. But eventually you have to be able to feel out like where a natural paragraph break is. And if your essay is 7 paragraphs, that's fine. If it's 4 paragraphs, that's fine. But you as a writer have to feel where the natural breaking point is. And like trying to explain that to students is so incredibly difficult. It's frustrating when trying to talk to my students because they have been taught more or less about the 5 paragraph essay. And they think that that's the only way to be successful. And they're so afraid of English because it has such wishy-washy rules that they're scared to like try anything else. And it's that fine line between trying to explain to them, like, you cannot just have one giant paragraph for 3 pages and you don't have to structure it in a 5 paragraph essay. And I feel like that's the hard thing about unlearning some of these things is that a lot of them have to do with not just a natural instinct, but kind of that inclination towards reading and writing of I know where to do a paragraph break. I know where I'm shifting ideas and new themes. And it's really hard to teach unlearning those concepts,
Right.
if that makes any sense.
No, it totally does. I also thought it was interesting that you're talking about how there's this kind of this fear of English. And I
Hmm.
was thinking back to all of the teachers I had and people that I know that talked about their English teachers, and they were always like hard asses.
Yeah,
So like
but I loved it.
I understand why people were afraid of them because they were like
Hmm.
always like very stern and strict. Um,
But
so
it's
like
funny because TV, there's always the joke of like the English teachers that get a little too involved in their students' lives, and like they're the ones that everyone goes to eat lunch in their room and like gossip with them too. So like it's a really weird
I never had
dichotomy.
I never had an English teacher like that.
Oh,
Absolutely
I
not.
did. I
No.
did. Um, well, and again, I don't know. I think that it depends, right? There we have certain inclinations in our brain of math has always been scary to me. And obviously finding out later on that I have dyscalculia like helped explain why it was so scary to me. Um, but I have so many students who come into class who are like, I'm bad at writing. And I'm like, you're probably not. It is a muscle that has to be used and like you have to practice with it in order to become flexible with it. And trying to explain to people like you write every single day. If you are texting, if you are emailing, like whatever, you have practice in communicating your ideas to other people every single day. Now you just have to do that on paper. And for some
Yeah.
reason, that's so scary to people. And I think that's why teachers start with the heavy structure of like 5 paragraph essay, don't use any adjectives, don't, do this, don't do. And then people get so scared that they're like, okay, well, I'm never allowed to start a sentence with because. And it's like, I mean, yeah, it's not great writing, but you can because that's how we talk. And I think especially transitioning from academic writing to non-academic writing, I think is where the most unlearning has to happen in order to find joy in it.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's there's a bit of code switching that goes on when you're writing
Hmm.
an essay versus when you're writing a story. And
Hmm.
There are certain rules. So when you're doing something academic or like professional writing, there are rules that have to be followed. Whereas in creative writing, there's a lot more freedom and flexibility. So I think
Hmm.
that's kind of where there might be a disconnect. Like, yes, these rules are important when you're doing formal writing, but not
Right.
necessarily for creative writing because that is more casual. It's more
Hmm.
conversational.
Right. And that's where I always struggled is, taking like AP Lit and AP Lang, I was great at interpreting the novels and like doing that really close reading exercise. But when it came to writing a research paper and like finding outside sources and then quoting them correctly, using correct MLA citations, like all of that kind of stuff, just doing the research basically is where I really struggled. And I find it's really funny because like, you think, oh, you're doing creative writing, you don't have to like do as much research. But I'm researching a ton for my second book and it sucks. I'm so bad at it. And like, I would love to learn how to get better. Um, but I don't know. It's that code switching. Like, it's really hard to have a brain that easily goes between academic and non-academic and, the rules and the breaking of the rules. And I feel like your brain does that really well because of your history in technical writing.
Yes, I definitely think that 10 years of practice of code switching
Hmm.
is what it took. It's not like it's a natural thing. It's something that
Yeah.
lots of years of work helped, but it also helped my writing a lot too, like my creative writing. I learned some stuff
Hmm.
like I think probably the biggest thing is economy because in technical writing, you're supposed to use as few words as possible
Right.
because people have very short attention spans, but you want them to have the information. You're
Hmm.
also, because of translation and people who have English as a second language, you want to use very precise but very easy to understand language.
Hmm.
And that also helps because, we have this idea that when you write a story, it has to use these big, beautiful, colorful words. But
Right.
I actually think it's more impressive when you use
Hmm.
like simpler words
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
tell your story.
Hmm. I know that you don't generally write in Word, but if you go to Word, they have the tool that shows you basically like what your reading level is at or what your
Yeah.
writing level is at. I'm almost consistently between like a fifth grade and ninth grade reading level when it comes to my writing because I do a lot of dialogue. I'm very colloquial. I don't have a lot of these big heavy descriptions, and I love authors who can do that, but it never feels natural to me. I've always been more conversational in my writing, and I try and tell my students that even when writing academically, I'm like, listen, do not bust out the thesaurus. Like, it will not make sense anymore. It is so much more important to communicate clearly and effectively what you're trying to say
Yeah.
than trying to use fucking SAT words, you know? Like, and it's great to have a big vocabulary, but like,
Mhm.
it's better to be clear in what you're trying to say.
Yeah, I also think that's using big vocabulary words makes sense if it's like a very particular thing you're trying to
Yes.
say, because usually those big
Hmm.
vocabulary words have a very specific meaning and connotation, but they should be used
Yes.
sparingly. Don't use them all the
Hmm.
time, or your reader is gonna think like, oh, somebody had their
Hmm.
thesaurus.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's another great thing to unlearn is I think especially when people start doing creative writing, they want to be as verbose as possible, and it can get really distracting and kind of muddy the waters of your story. And I think that's another great thing to unlearn is, yeah, it's great to write beautifully. Pat Conroy, I think, is one of my favorite authors when it comes to his descriptive language, but he uses it very sparingly and very intentionally in his writing instead of just word vomit everywhere.
Yeah, I would definitely think that's good writing advice is to think about your intention when you're using the word.
Hmm.
Are you using this word because you want people to know you know this word? Or does it make
Yeah.
sense that this character would perceive it this way? Because like,
Hmm.
I have different characters. Like I have a character as a professor, and they tend to sometimes they end up using
Hmm.
bigger words than other characters do because that's
Yes.
part of their personality. But yeah, I think like following that instinct. But I like to think of writing as when you're writing a story, what you're kind of doing is you're like casting a spell over the person who's reading it. Like
Uh-huh.
they're supposed to like get lost in this world as
Hmm.
you're like telling the story and they're like, yes, I see that, I see that. But if you have like a really big word, they'll be like, what? And it'll break the illusion
Right.
and it's
Yes.
over. The spell is broken. They're
Hmm.
out of it. So like you want to keep them on the same rhythm, on the same path, and don't do anything that's going
Hmm.
to distract them. Unless you
Yes.
want
And
them
again,
distracted.
like you said, it's not a bad thing to use big words, but just using them intentionally, really making sure that your vocabulary is exactly where you want it to be for a specific purpose.
Also, Also, if you want to use a lot of big words, and that's
Hmm.
like just like where you're naturally inclined, that's not
Hmm.
necessarily a bad thing. Just know
No.
your audience and know the genre you're
Right.
writing in.
Totally.
So if you're using a lot of verbose language and you
Hmm.
want to be like a YA author, that's you should
Right.
probably cool it a
Yeah.
bit. Like
Yeah. Well,
maybe throw in a few SAT words to help them learn
yeah.
them, but like not like constantly.
Well, I think that John Green is a great example of that when it comes to YA. He always has that one kind of like precocious character who uses the bigger vocabulary, but he calls it out. The other characters will be like, "What the fuck are you saying right now?" And so I think that he really understands his audience and how to communicate with them while still he's not pandering to the lowest common denominator, you
Mhm.
know? Because I think that that's another thing that happens a lot that needs to be unlearned is you're allowed to write big words. You're allowed to write all of this, but like you said, just know your audience, know who you're trying to reach with all of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you have had to unlearn in your writing or any advice that just pisses you off still?
Oh, I have a list. I have a
Oh, let
list.
me see. Tell me.
Let's talk about, I think we've talked about this before on this podcast.
Mhm.
Show, don't tell.
Yeah, yeah, I have a hard time with that because I do think it depends on the format. I think if you're writing a novel or an epic, you have time to show, for the most part. Obviously, when working in flash fiction or short stories, you really have to be economic, with your word count in telling. But that's one that I have a hard time with.
Well, so economic, yes, but I think the reason that we do show sometimes and tell other
Hmm.
times is because showing is you want people to look at this. This is important. But
Yeah.
sometimes in order to get them to the point of showing them the important part, you
Hmm.
need to tell them how we got there. But that
Yeah.
information's not necessarily that important because like
Hmm.
it's like you're not writing you're not writing Ulysses. You're not writing
Right.
every single
Yes.
moment of somebody they
Oh my
open the
God.
door, they step
Exactly.
out, they like put their
Yes.
jacket on. That is why
Hmm.
telling exists to skip over those
Yep.
moments. I would argue even
Hmm.
in flash fiction and story
Yeah.
and short stories, you do need to have an element of tell. Don't show everything.
Right. Yes. Well,
That's
and that's what I'm saying. I think in short stories you have to tell more than you show. Whereas in novels, you have a little bit of time to show things that aren't necessarily the most important, but might just like build character development or set the scene or like you have more time. But like you said, telling is so important because we don't want a play by play. I don't want to know a character snoozed their alarm 3 times and then got up and then their breath was bad and then they brushed their teeth. When the whole story actually takes place, the fucking car accident that happens an hour later, you
Yes. I
know?
would say ask yourself what's
Yeah.
important. I would say, is this
Yeah.
relevant? And like ask yourself a couple of questions about like, is this
Hmm.
showing my character? Is this like
Hmm.
setting up the plot? Is this important to the story? If it's not super
Hmm.
important, you can just tell it.
Yeah.
We don't need you to show
Yeah.
it as a scene.
And again, I think that that advice comes from a good, I think all of this advice comes from a
Yes,
good place.
100%.
But it's that thing of English of it lives in the nuance and students and people who are exploring creative writing have such a hard time getting out of that place to understand the nuance. So like I do tell my students, show, don't tell, because my students will sit there and do an entire paragraph explaining a conversation that's happening between two people instead of giving me the fucking conversation. Um, and so it's just one of those things where it's like it comes from such a good place, but you have to understand when to use them. And I think honestly, what a lot of this boils down to is like, do you read? Because I really find that the students who read and are taking in, even if they're not studying these books, but they're just consuming a lot of it, they understand the nuances a lot better than somebody who doesn't.
Yeah, 100%. But I think it's just it's advice like because it seems like such a hard rule, like show, don't
Hmm.
tell.
Right. Yes.
But it's not that. I think like
No.
maybe it's like 70-30,
Yeah,
60,
absolutely.
like just
Yeah.
mostly you want to show because if you're telling,
Hmm.
then you're not writing the story that you want to write.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing is what I tell my students a lot is I'm like, don't summarize because that's kind of what telling ends up being is you're just summarizing something. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, this is important. We need to see this happening. Don't summarize this. Um, and I really like that we're kind of breaking down these like hard and fast rules of writing because they're not at all
No,
hard and fast, but
no.
people think that they are.
It's because you just hear show, don't tell. You don't hear
Yeah.
why that's
Hmm.
a rule, why we say that. It's because a lot of people's inclination is to just
Hmm.
tell and speak in like a
Yep.
passive voice about this happened and
Hmm.
then this happened. But that's not
Right.
writing is you're creating a scene. And I do
Hmm.
want to add a little bit of context to a
Hmm.
scene because
Yeah.
scenes are that's what we mean by show. You want to create a scene.
Right.
And
Exactly.
the advice that
Yes.
I really like is in a
Hmm.
scene must do one of these things.
Okay.
Advance the plot,
Hmm.
advance the character arc,
Hmm.
raise the stakes, or provide essential information for the plot.
I love that.
So
Hmm.
if you're writing something and you're like, do I show it or do I tell it? Ask yourself, does it do
Hmm.
one of these four things?
Yeah.
If it's
That's
not
a
doing one of those
great
four
way to think about
things,
it.
then just tell us. We don't need to know the details.
That's so good. I love that.
That's actually from a
Yeah.
book that I've been reading. I think it's by Tiffany Yates.
Okay.
I want to shout her out because I've really been enjoying her book on editing. It's called
Yeah.
Intuitive Editing by Tiffany Yates Martin.
Okay. No, I'm stealing that from my classroom. That's really, really a great way to break that down for people who just might not understand it, you know?
Yeah. Another thing on it kind of in relation to this, and
Hmm.
something I've always struggled with is like because as a technical writer, you do need to tell everything.
Yes. Hmm.
So like I'm like the people are going to be confused if like he's over
Hmm.
here and then in the next scene he's over here. No, they
Hmm.
won't. They won't be confused. Just you
Yeah.
just open the scene like he's
Yeah.
you're having a drink with this guy and then you figure out as you're there like, "Oh, we're at a bar now. We're no longer at the castle."
Hmm.
There's a scene break, so you know that t there's been some
Right.
sort of time skip. We're switching to
Hmm.
somewhere else. You don't need to
Hmm.
explain, "Oh, and then he got up and he walked over there." It's like, no, like you don't need to
Yeah.
do that. You just start there and then tell the character tell as you're moving through the scene, start painting the picture that, "Oh, we've moved locations." Your audience is
Yeah.
pretty smart. They can figure that out.
Well, and I think that again, we see that because of people who read more, that they understand, oh, if there's a paragraph break or, whatever, that means a scene change, a time change, a point of view change. Like we know a chapter break or a paragraph break signals something new is happening.
Right.
And so it's,
I
it's using
think
those little writer shorthands.
I think that's something I had to relearn or unlearn from technical writing
Hmm.
is because you had
Yeah.
every single step had to be explained. And as I was editing my novel, I was realizing that I had like done a lot of like, I don't need to explain that he stepped over here. Like now he's like
Yeah.
touching this person's face. We know that he moved from this location to this
Oh.
location. Like we can kind of
Hmm.
fill in the gaps. You don't need to
Yeah.
explain everything. And so that's something that I've been trying to relearn and remind
Hmm.
myself because it's not so
Hmm.
much like I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to do that. It's just I didn't notice that that was a pattern I had.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I like that idea too of we can unlearn from our own writing as we go through the editing process because there's so much. I mean, you and I have talked about a lot of the short stories that we have submitted for things are things that we wrote when we were in undergrad or in grad school, or that time in between kind of, and like going back and reworking those same stories my writing has grown and changed so much that you really have to like unlearn that voice or that structure to create something new and to be able to move forward. And it's not to say that like all of our old writing is bad. It's
I
just we have habits and tendencies that we don't see.
Yeah, I'd also like to kind of flip that and
Hmm.
talking about learning from your past self, like stuff
Yeah.
that you used to do, but because of all the rules that you learned, you stopped doing.
Yeah.
And then
Yep.
looking back and being like, "Oh wait, this is really good." But
Hmm.
like somewhere along the line, something taught me to like not do that anymore. And it was
Right.
something that was good about my writing and something I can
Hmm.
bring back now that I understand it. Or like, kind of like you get to in that editorial brain and you start like
Hmm.
trimming down stuff that you instinctually had in your writing before that is good
Yeah.
to bring back. Like again, like with technical writing, I feel like did some damage too to my writing because like
Hmm.
I used to be very like poetic and they had this like flowing language that I kind of don't have as much anymore. And I was
Hmm.
reading old stuff that I wrote in grad school and was like, no, I like this. This is like an authentic style to me. And I can bring that back now that I have a better understanding and control of like what's waxing poetic a little too much and what's a happy
Right.
medium.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that brings us to another one of those rules, like you were talking about earlier with adverbs and adjectives that everyone's like, don't use too many, but sometimes it's okay to use some. One of my like not hard and fast rules, but one of my kind of pet peeves is people who every single speech tag feel the need to qualify it in some way. She said quickly, he, spoke in a rush, or, she, just whatever it is. She shouted, she exclaimed, she yelled, he mumbled. Sometimes it's okay to just say said.
Yes. That's
Like,
I have two things to say about that because of course there's
okay.
I'll circle back to this one, but like said
Mm,
is dead, but we'll circle back to that one.
yeah.
We've talked about that before, but I also want to talk about that specifically the adverbs on
Hmm.
dialogue tags
Yeah.
is so first of all, you can use adverbs totally
Yeah,
fine because
absolutely.
they're words.
Mhm.
Don't take a tool out of your toolbox. You can definitely use an
Yes.
adverb. I say if you want to use an adverb on a dialogue tag, that's something you do very sparsely. And in my
Yes.
opinion, the reason you would do it is either
Mhm.
like it's really important that the character understands like or the reader understands that this is how it was said. Like it's
Yep.
really important to the plot or really important to character development. Or if they're doing something that is like unusual. Like if it's a character
Yes.
who wouldn't yell, they yelled, and you're like, oh, because
Hmm.
that's something that they wouldn't do
Right.
necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I also think that a lot of times we use it sparingly because if your writing is good enough, it should be conveyed that they are yelling. You don't have to write in all caps. You don't have to use six exclamation points. If the scene is building that tension correctly and the characters' reactions are in line with what's happening, then them shouting can be inferred and understood with one exclamation point, you know? Um, and I think that that's where people get into trouble is that they try and do too much sometimes. But
Yeah,
I
I
do
would
want to get
also
back to, go ahead.
so I would also say that sometimes you have to like pull back a bit and let your audience
Yes.
direct the story because
Yeah.
I mean, sure you have it in your mind how they say every single thing
Hmm.
in their dialogue, but is it
Hmm.
important that the reader knows that they had
Right.
an inflection on this word?
Hmm.
Not necessarily. Let the reader like
Right.
they've had their own vision of this character. Let them decide how they say it, unless it's like it
Hmm.
needs to be read this way. Some things you
Right.
just let go because, especially in a novel, you have so much dialogue. Don't
Hmm.
explain how every single sentence, every single word is said. It's
Yes.
too much.
Yes. It's too much. No, I completely agree. But I want to circle back to what you were saying about set is dead. Can you elaborate on that?
Said is not dead.
Set is not dead.
I hate that so much. That
Yep.
is a piece of advice that I just want to just drop kick out the door. Please,
Yeah.
the word said is amazing because we've
Yeah.
talked about this on this podcast. I know. It's a nothing word. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't it's like it doesn't exist. It's amazing. It's like when you're reading a book, you don't realize you're reading the word said.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, he said. It's like now I know which
Yep.
character this is being attributed to.
Exactly.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
all it is. It's like a
Hmm.
period. It's like you're just
And
letting
it's all,
somebody know.
yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. It is like punctuation. It is just doing a job. And I feel like that's sometimes what writing has to be. Not every single word is going to be the single best word that you possibly could have chosen for that exact moment is going to be revolutionary. Some words just do the job of moving the story forward.
Hmm. Yeah, and you don't need to
Yeah.
say if you have like a character, two characters going back and forth, you don't need to put he said,
Mhm.
she said, he said, she said.
Right. Exactly.
Just every
Yeah.
once in a while, just be like, in case like we've lost
Hmm.
count of like the back
Yep.
and forth, just like say,
Yeah.
he said this. And I was like, okay, thank you
Yep.
for reminding me who's.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I think sometimes people have such a hard time moving into the creative writing space because they've been drilled so hard in the academic writing space of, what makes good writing, and they're so bogged down in like the rules of it. But I do want to talk a little bit about, did you ever have a teacher who did like creative writing once a week, or like at the top of every class do like a creative writing journal or something like that?
We had like a journal that we did, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily creative writing. It was just like write about your day or something like that. I guess it would
Okay.
be kind
No,
of
but
creative
yeah.
writing, but it wasn't like
I
specified.
still, no, of course, I still count that as creative writing. But like one of the things I like to do in my classes is at the top of every class for 10 minutes, we just do writing. And I give them a prompt every single time, just so that they have something to write about. Because obviously, again, when people are so afraid of writing, they would rather just stare at a blank page for 10 minutes than attempt to be creative. Um, and I have gotten so much feedback from students of just like how helpful that is to just word vomit onto the page, really. And I think that that's a kind of a lost art, and something that I think people need to unlearn as well is you don't have to write for a specific purpose. I mean, you and I have talked about like there is no wasted writing.
Mhm.
And I think the art of journaling and like having a diary even is so lost. And I think that part of it is because, getting on my feminist soapbox, diaries specifically have been so weaponized against women, and are so tied to like femininity and like girlishness, crushes, things like that. But like the reality is, it is a way to process the day and process your emotions and process what's happening to you. And we see that so often with young men who don't fucking know how to process any emotions. And if everybody was just given a fucking diary and like allowed to write about their feelings without fear of their mom coming in and reading their diary, I think it would be so helpful. So like I always try to encourage my students of just like, here's a topic, just fucking write for 10 minutes. Nobody's going to read it. You don't have to share it. There's an option if you want to share it with the class, but you don't have to. It's not going to be fucking graded. It's not going to be an assignment. And there are always students who, spend the 10 minutes on their fucking phone. It is what it is. But a lot of times I have students who are like, I really appreciate that 10 minutes. Like it gave me a chance to just reset and get ready for class.
Yeah. Kind of similar on that note is there's this idea of finishing every project you start.
Yeah.
And I don't like that
Mm-hmm.
because I think
Mm-hmm.
or not necessarily I think that works if you redefine what it means to finish your project. Finishing your project doesn't
Yes.
necessarily mean it's a completed draft that I'm submitting for querying or publication or whatever.
Exactly.
It could be
Mm-hmm.
like you get like 60 pages in, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
I've done everything I can for this novel and it's
Mm-hmm.
done and it's over and I put it away. That project is finished because
Yep.
the goal was to learn all the things you learned while you were writing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that
Yeah.
like any more effort in this is not gonna
Mm-hmm.
help me in any
Yeah.
way.
I'm going to push back a little bit in redefining the idea of finished. I think that you should always write a conclusion. I think that's a great thing to practice. I think that every piece should have some kind of conclusion, but I strongly agree with you of you don't have to do anything with that piece. You can just write the very first rough draft and then be done with it. You don't ever have to edit it. You don't ever have to submit it. You don't ever have to move forward with it. You're allowed to just write the thing and then walk away. But I do think that people often struggle with writing a project and then not knowing where it's going and giving up and just starting something new. And I think that it's a skill to write a conclusion that, is really helpful.
I mean, it definitely is, but sometimes when you're in the beginning, you're not ready to, you're just learning how to write beginnings, you're just learning how to write
Yeah.
middles. I have so many projects that I have started and not finished, and I would never go back. I'm not upset that I didn't write a conclusion because I wasn't learning that at that time. So I've gone back and I have other projects that I do that I write conclusions. So I would push back on that because I don't think those projects are wasted just because I didn't write a conclusion for them.
No, I don't think they're wasted, but I think it's a good practice to get into, as we're talking about like things to unlearn. I think it's important to unlearn. You don't have to edit and publish everything. But I also think that, you have now had to, like you were talking about learning things, you've had to go through and specifically do that flash fiction writing exercise so that you can train yourself to write conclusions.
Hmm.
And I think it's a skill that needs to be built up. And it does make me wonder, like, if you had forced yourself to write conclusions to each of those things, even if it's not perfect, even if it's not all the loose ends tied up. Because again, we're not going back editing, we're not making sure it's perfect.
Right.
We're just
Well,
ending it.
in the beginning,
Uh-huh.
when I first started stories, I would not let myself do anything else until I wrote the conclusion. And the
Right.
conclusions were always really bad. And then I became
Yeah.
so, it got so much in my head that I didn't know how to write conclusions and that I didn't know what they were. So then
Okay.
I had to just let myself write
Hmm.
and just stop when I could no longer had something because of the fact that I
Hmm.
forced it. It
Hmm.
broke my self-confidence in writing conclusions, which then made it hard for me to write conclusions.
So how did you overcome that? Because I feel like if you don't do it, you don't have the practice in it. But at the same time, like you were talking about, you don't want to break your spirit with it. So like how do you get through that conundrum?
Well, I did it by doing smaller projects that had a lot less
Hmm.
stakes in them.
Hmm.
And also like just letting myself write until I didn't want to write anymore and not
Hmm.
forcing myself to make it like a completed circle. Like I just wrote what I had in me and then moved
Hmm.
on. And then that just taught me to like, kind of falling back in love with writing
Hmm.
because I
Okay.
fell out of love with it because of the forced ending that it just felt
Interesting.
wrong and it hurt me. So I would say
Hmm.
like just keep that in mind. Like
Yeah.
I think there is like it's important to write an ending to things,
Hmm.
but it's okay if not everything has an ending.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I think it's important to recognize your patterns, I guess. If you have a pattern of never finishing something, of never writing a conclusion, you're gonna have to push back against that. And if
Yeah.
you notice, you're forcing yourself and it's making you hate it or lose your self-confidence, you can push back against that in some way. But I think that's a really good point is the unlearning comes from not everything's 100%.
Yeah, I also
Like
think
you
too
have to
like
feel yourself.
there's also the learning of what you need.
Yeah,
Because like there's like stuff
absolutely.
like I think just this entire conversation like where you're like everything has to have an ending and I disagree
Hmm.
with that. But I
Yeah.
think that's because we're different writers. And for me, I
Yes.
needed to not force that
Hmm.
because sometimes I write stuff and it doesn't have an ending. But
Yeah.
I learned something about like how to tell character, how to set a scene,
Hmm.
and I later use that in a story that I do have an ending for.
Hmm.
So
I think
like,
it's so funny to me because we were talking about this before we started recording. We were talking about the idea of writing television and how some TV writers go into it being like, I know I need 4 seasons. This is a story I want to tell. Like, this is, beginning, middle, end, whatever. And then there are some shows,
mhm,
that just it doesn't have an ending necessarily. And I think of shows like Friends that really it could have had a very satisfying conclusion after 5 seasons. It could have had a very satisfying conclusion after 7 seasons, but it went to 10. And there are episodes that suck, and like there are storylines that make no sense, but I still think they ended it in a very satisfying way. And I think that that's kind of a cool thing to think about is like that episodic writing of
mhm.
sometimes you're just playing with character, sometimes you're adding to the larger storyline, sometimes you're just playing with setting.
But
So
I
I
would
like that idea of
say
like each project focuses on a certain thing.
yeah, yeah. Like, and have
Yeah.
like the like finished making the end goal that I learned this
Hmm.
skill.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I like that.
if it doesn't have like a solid like this character ends here and ends here, but
Hmm.
you've completed the project of like I have learned how
Hmm.
to do this thing, that's fine. But
Yeah.
I also think that what you just said about like you specifically use Friends, which is a sitcom, and
Yes,
other
of
shows that have
course.
like 4 seasons and they're done are usually
Hmm.
like it's a completely different
Yeah.
genre. It's like a drama
Well,
genre.
but like my thing that I was thinking of is I always think of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which is technically a sitcom. It has a lot of deeper themes to it. It's also a musical comedy. But they went in and said, Rachel Bloom said, I need 4 seasons. This is going to be the storyline. And it's still comedic and, has kind of the tropes of sitcom, but it very much went in with this is the story I'm trying to tell.
Right.
Whereas Friends was just, I don't know, what if there was a bunch of friends? You
Right, but
know?
then that's still like those are still like they're
Yeah.
similar genres, but I still think they are
Mhm.
separate genres because this is like an
Mhm.
episodic sitcom.
Mhm.
That's the genre we're in, so it doesn't need
Yeah.
to have. So I think the
Mhm.
remembering what genre you're in is really important. And you
Yeah.
can be in a very specific subgenre that's, just know where
Right.
you're at.
Well, and even my friend really keeps trying to push me to watch One Piece, which I just can't commit to. And like the joke of One Piece is that there's a bazillion episodes to it and it just keeps going. And it's anime, so that is another kind of genre that allows for this hugely episodic thing. But still each season has an arc, has a whatever. But like even Michael will go back and rewatch Naruto every so often. He's like, "Oh, I can skip this. It's just a filler episode. It has literally nothing to
So
do with the
many,
overall
yeah.
storyline." Yeah. Um, and so I think that going back to thinking about writing and unlearning is sometimes it's going to be a filler episode. Sometimes it's just going to be, you know, this character wanted ramen and we're going to follow them to the village as they find a ramen shop. And sometimes it's, oh shit, this is the big bad fight. Like, we're going
Yeah.
to focus in on this.
I think Naruto might be a terrible example because there's there's filler episodes because then they're
Mhm.
like, damn, we said we'd bring 12 episodes
Oh, yeah.
by this time frame. Well, okay, we're gonna make it up. But I think like if you have
Yeah.
filler episodes in like your story, they still are accomplishing something. Like they're explaining this
No,
character,
I
like the
agree.
environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like
But I
like
think,
Dragon Ball Z,
mhm.
had like they were just waiting to see what happened in the manga before they continued on with the animes. There's literally
Right.
there's like this the longest fight in anime history, I think,
Hmm.
because they just were like
Yeah.
sitting there like staring at each other across the vista because they're like,
Hmm.
oh, we don't know how this fight's gonna go, so we'll just
Right. Yeah.
Piccolo's gonna get a driver's license.
Versus there are things like Game of Thrones where they just keep writing and don't really care. They're like, we can't keep waiting. We're just gonna keep plunging forward with the show. Yeah, we've completely gotten off track from unlearning things and are now just talking about TV.
Well, but I think there's a lot to learn from that. Like,
Yeah.
I think there's stuff to learn from that. I just wanted to point out that Naruto is there's
I
there's
just,
too much. The filler
oh,
episodes are just so bad. They're so bad, Abigail.
well, and sometimes what you write is gonna be bad. Like sometimes those little writing exercises that don't have an end are gonna be
Yes,
bad.
but unlike Naruto,
You
throw
don't have
them
to publish them.
away.
Yes, yes, that's true. Well, going back to you were talking about finishing means accomplishing something, like accomplishing a skill or accomplishing whatever. I think that it goes back to the difference between you and I is and maybe I'm misunderstanding this. I don't start writing something with the goal of today I'm going to practice characterization and today I'm going to practice setting and today I start writing because I have an idea for this story and I want to get that story down and like on paper and out of me so that I can move on with my life. And I think that might be why I tend to have to have a conclusion because I want it to be closed so that my brain can stop thinking about it. And since you're a planner, you
Hmm.
already, oh, well, this is why I'm writing this story. This is what I'm going into it for. Whereas I often have to figure that out.
Yeah, I think like for me, there's stories that like I don't like if I'm making an outline, it's because I know the
Hmm.
beginning and the end.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes where I just like I have a concept and I'm like, oh, let me play with that. And I don't always have an ending for it.
Hmm.
But it's
So
about
how
the
do you
discovery.
know? Well, I was gonna say, how do you know what you're discovering though? How do you know when you're finished other than just I've lost interest?
Well, be like taking what I have learned from it. Like, what did I like? It's like, oh, I
Hmm.
tried a different POV that I've never tried before, and this is as far as I could take it, and I don't see where the story's going. But like,
Hmm.
kind of dissecting it and seeing like, what did I learn from this? And sometimes I
Hmm.
go in with the idea of like, you know what? I've never written like a person in. I've never written a story in second person. Let's see how far I can take
Hmm.
it. But I don't
Hmm.
have like a complete story in mind. Whereas
Yeah.
most of the time as a planner, if I'm like devoting my time to a project, it's
Hmm.
like I know how it begins and I know how it ends.
Hmm.
And so I have an
Interesting.
ending.
Are you a completionist with your video games?
Yes,
That's
very
so
much so.
interesting. So am I. I just don't understand. I don't know. Maybe it's my OCD brain of like all of these things have to be the same. Um, but that's really interesting to me that you don't have to finish things or like conclude things. Like my brain just doesn't allow me to leave the loose end.
I mean, it's just like I it it wasn't like a maybe
Yeah.
it's not like it wasn't a story, it was a concept.
Hmm.
And so like I went in as much as I knew. And maybe I go back to that, maybe I bring that in because I've done that
Hmm.
before where like I had a story that like I never completed, but I ended
Hmm.
up bringing that character over to my
Hmm.
novel and being
Okay.
like, "Oh, I met this character through this half-finished short story." But I
Hmm.
didn't finish that
That's
short
cool.
story. But like I
Yeah.
did get a character, I did introduce to him, so I did
Hmm.
learn something from it.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I think I learned something from everything that I write. You know, like we talked about, there's no wasted writing. I just it's this is why I like this podcast is learning how other writers function and just the true differences in all of us of like my brain has to conclude something and it's not right or wrong, it's not good or bad, it's just the way that my brain works, you know. And I love learning how your brain works. It's just so interesting to me.
Yeah, because I think like putting the pressure to finish
Hmm.
something was
Yeah.
it just made it not fun anymore.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I
And
think
like
that's an awesome thing that you
I
learned
didn't
about
want to
yourself.
I didn't want to write anymore because it was like I don't want to
Hmm.
force myself to end something if I don't have an
Yeah.
ending in mind. If this
Hmm.
ending doesn't work, if this story is just not working and I don't have the passion to do it, I'm going to move on to
Yep.
something else. But I
Yeah.
think that's something else to unlearn is like there's
Hmm.
no like you don't have to be Abigail. You don't have to be me. Like you
Yes,
can do your
exactly. Right.
find your own path
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. Do you work well under deadlines?
Uh,
I didn't think that question was that hard.
well, I mean, it depends on your definition of well.
Hmm.
I mean, like, do I finish a project because of a deadline? Absolutely. Did I do the project well under a deadline? No.
Okay. Interesting. I really find that I thrive under a deadline because if I don't set a deadline, then it will just kind of float around and I'll be like, I'll get to that eventually. So like I am having this next baby at the end of May, and I'm like, okay, I want to finish the edits for my second book so that I can start querying before the baby comes. Because once she comes, that's two kids, like I will literally have no time. And so like setting that deadline for myself and then kind of breaking it down is very helpful to my writing process of like, you have to do this, you have to take this seriously. Um, so I was just wondering if that works for you too.
I would say that
No.
I every time I've had a deadline, I've always finished a project,
Hmm.
but I haven't necessarily liked the project
Have you
because
ever been happy with it? Because again,
yes, I
you made
have been.
yourself deadlines for these short stories. Okay.
Well, but I didn't even follow. So for like the flash fictions, I want to do one every day.
Hmm.
And then as I started to
Okay.
write, I realized that didn't make any sense. I
Yeah.
wasn't going to. And
Yeah.
so like then I didn't really have so much of a deadline. I just was like now I
Hmm.
had like a project and I was starting to work on it
Okay.
until it was finished and then I'd send it. And I've
Hmm.
been very happy with many projects I've written and been very proud of them. Um,
Yeah.
but it's like I think when there's like a deadline, especially if it's like a forced deadline, there's something about having a deadline that makes me not want to do it until the very last minute.
Yeah, the arbitrary deadlines, absolutely. If I'm like, I need to finish this by May, just because, then I will never ever do that. But it's like, no, there is a major life-changing thing happening. You have to fucking prioritize this. And I can do that. But I agree. I think if somebody was just like, finish your edits by the end of February, I'd be like, why? For what?
Cause like, cause like, with my thesis, that
Hmm.
deadline, I phoned it in at the end. to be honest. Like,
Really?
yeah.
Oh, dude, I pushed myself like crazy because I didn't want to do so. With our master's degree, our thesis only had to be a certain number of pages. It did not have to be a finished, completed project. But again, because the way my brain works, I wanted to turn in my entire novel. I wanted to be done and be like, this is a whole fucking novel. And so I really pushed myself to write that and have a fully completed. That was actually, I think, my second or third draft of that
Mm.
novel that ended up being my finished thesis. But my brain was like, you have to finish this. This is the last time you're in school. Get it done.
I mean,
I don't know,
I
man.
think that that particular example has more to do with the
Mhm.
fact that my mentor
Yeah, it was horrible.
hated everything that I'd done. Like there were stories I was really
Yeah.
proud of and I thought were and I was like, these are done, these are polished.
Mhm.
My other
Yeah.
mentors liked them and she's like telling me to
Hmm.
rewrite, like completely rewrite the ones that I was happy with that were done.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that made me like question my own ability. Like, do I not know when the
Right.
story's over? Did I not is
Uh-huh.
and so like I
Yeah.
didn't get to
I
work
just
on
want to
the
slap that woman in the face. God.
so like I just, I think that has a lot to do with it is like I didn't know like
Hmm.
I'm like I lost all confidence. Like I thought
Yeah.
these five stories were done and I wanted to work on these
Hmm.
five stories during this semester, but she's like, all these are bad. These need to be completely rewritten. And I thought
Hmm.
they were done and I hadn't
Yeah.
planned on working on them. So I didn't have like
Hmm.
I had planned like very slowly to like have
Hmm.
everything done by the time my thesis came out, but I
Yeah.
ran out of time because I had to keep correcting stuff for her.
Well, right. And that's the thing that's hard is that it's one of those things of like, if you know she's not going to like anything anyway, why bother trying? Becomes really hard. But I want to go back and think about another thing with unlearning is when it comes to workshops and mentors, is the fine line between being able to stand up for your writing and know your truth and also being able to accept and integrate criticism because I think that's something that I really struggled with. My AP Lit and Lang teacher, Miss Ayers, she's wonderful. I love that woman so much. But she was one of those teachers who was absolutely a hard ass, who, if you answered a question, she'd go, no, and move on. And it was so hard for me at first because I was like, well, what do you mean, no? And eventually we got the rapport of I could say, this is why I think this. This is evidence from the text that could bring me there. And she would have a conversation with that. But like it was such a kind of skill because so often, and I find myself doing it, students will say something completely out of left field, and you're like, well, I can see how you got there. And it's like, no, you're just wrong. Sometimes you're just fucking wrong. And so going into college and grad school, I had that chip on my shoulder of like, oh, if I can explain myself, if I can show evidence from the text, I get to be right. And that's also not necessarily true. Sometimes you're fucking wrong. And like, I had a really hard time accepting criticism going into undergrad and grad school because I thought if I can defend this enough, then I can prove it's good writing instead of listening to, okay, well, if six people in the class all feel the same thing, they might have a valid point. But I also don't have to listen to that one asshole in the corner who never has anything nice to say. Like that was a really hard unlearning concept for me.
Yeah, I I think grad school was really hard for me because I never thought my writing had any value. I never thought I was a good writer.
I
And
just want
so
to
like
hug baby Maddie.
and so like but I still love to write and everyone was like, "Oh, Maddie's a writer." And so I
Hmm.
was like, "Well, I want to try and do grad school because I want to be a
Yeah.
writer and maybe one day I'll be good." And so I would
Hmm.
go to school and then
Yeah.
like everyone would be like, "This sucks. This is bad." And I'm like, "I knew it. I knew that I
Right.
wasn't a
Yeah.
good writer. I knew this was a waste of time." So like what I really needed is I needed like somebody to be like sitting there reading my book and just be like, "Oh my God, this is a great." I needed somebody to give me a big ego
Hmm.
boost before I went so that I could be more of an
Yeah.
Abigail and be confident in my work going in, but I never was. I never
Again,
was.
my mom raised a very obstinate child. I always felt like, well, what do you mean you're not going to listen to my opinion? And it's like, well, it's the opinion of a 10-year-old when it comes to taxes. Yeah, you don't really get an opinion. Um, And so I think that that's again, it was absolutely a value to be able to like stand up for my work, but it was also a detriment because I got to the point where I was so afraid to share anything with a workshop setting because I just felt like they were going to tear it apart and I couldn't hear the good things.
Mm.
And it was a skill that I really had to like acquire. And even now, there are times that like if somebody wants to edit something, I'll bristle at it and then be like, okay, why did that one strike a nerve? Like, is there truth in it, or is this something I need to write better to clarify?
Yeah, I mean that's something that I still try and like anytime I've had somebody read my work and they send me they're like, "Oh,
Hmm.
I gave you some feedback." I have to like brace myself
Yeah.
because I'll open it up and I'll be like I'm like I can't wait for them to tell
Mhm.
me, Maddie, I I'm the first person to tell you this, but you've really been wasting your time and it's time for you to give up. I'm so sorry. Like, I don't know why you thought that you could write. I really wish somebody had stopped you sooner. That's what I'm expecting to see. And it's almost like I
Just
want them.
imagining Jakey trying to say that to you.
That's literally who I was imagining. Because Jake is always
Yeah.
like, every time he reads my work, he always
Hmm.
just like talks about how much he loves it, and his
Yeah.
critiques are always
Yeah.
very valid and like I see them, but he
Hmm.
always like builds me up and tells
Yep.
me like how great my writing
Yeah.
is and how much he got out of
Hmm.
it and like characters he really loved and like stuff that
He
I
gives
liked and he
great
points out.
feedback. He's edited one of my pieces before, and like he's
So good.
very, very balanced in the feedback that he gives. Yeah.
Yes, but I still like it's like almost like I
Hmm.
it's like I have such low self-confidence that I'm just wait like I want somebody to tell me that I'm so bad I need to stop so that I'm like, okay, I can finally give up. I don't have
Oh
to do
my
this anymore.
God. That's so funny to me though, of like your self-confidence is so low that you don't even trust yourself to
No.
think that you're bad. Like if you say, I'm really bad at writing, I have to give up, you still don't believe
No,
that.
I don't trust
Like,
myself. I need somebody to be real with me. I've been waiting for a long time. Nobody, literally, not even my
maybe,
worst mentor never said stop writing. She never said that. Maybe she
maybe
should
it's
have.
because you're good at writing. Maybe it's because your work has value.
Maybe it's because everybody could
Maybe.
see how sensitive I am, so they didn't know how to tell me because they were afraid that I'd cry.
Oh my God. Listen, I have sat in a room full of people who have told me that my main character is a bitch and why should they bother reading about her? I don't think they were too afraid to tell you anything. I am
Yeah,
positive
I
that there is
think
an
like
entitled middle-aged white man who would have told you to stop writing if he thought that.
I I'm trying to think. I had one where they spent like half the class trying to figure out whether or not the woman what well actually it was just, there was one guy in the class that was convinced that the lady in the story was having sex with the android in the story. And
Okay.
nobody else like this was not the story was not about the relationship between the woman and the android.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was the only one who thought that they were like having a sexual relationship, and they spent the entire class arguing about it.
Jesus Christ. See, and again, that's a bad mentor. That is a bad teacher in the classroom who isn't able to say, like, hey, let's move on from this and talk about the rest of it. This is why workshops fucking fail. That makes me
Awful.
so mad. Yeah.
Anyway,
Sorry.
I
Anyway.
okay, so another one that's really I don't necessarily think it's bad advice.
Hmm.
Kill your darlings,
Yeah.
but don't
Hmm.
be afraid to Frankenstein them later.
Ooh.
I
Okay. Elaborate.
I always everything I cut, I save in an archive
Yeah.
because sometimes I'll be writing and I'm like, once upon a time, there was a scene where I did this, and I'll take parts of it,
Nice.
and then I'll take
Hmm.
another part from over here, and I'll just stitch it together, and it'll be like a brand new scene.
Very smart. See, my problem is I save all of that and then I don't remember any of it, like at all. So I never think to go back and
Well,
use
I'm
it.
just saying, like, no,
Yeah.
don't necessarily like kill your
Hmm.
darlings, like
No, absolutely.
bury them,
Yeah.
but like know where you buried them.
Yeah. But going even further into that, there's a piece of that that's like, you know, you don't always have to make your characters fucking miserable. Like, yes, they should overcome challenges, they should face obstacles, but listen, whether you liked it or not, the last season of Stranger Things had a lot of things happening, but the Duffer Brothers said, this is not Game of Thrones. We're not killing characters just for the sake of killing characters. We're not trying to just emotionally manipulate the audience into crying for no reason.
Oh,
Like, if somebody dies, there is a reason. Again, season had a lot of problems. But I do support the concept of like we're not going to kill characters just for the sake of killing characters. And I think that a lot of students always have that like, oh, if I'm not writing about something really sad and miserable, then my writing's no good. Which is why I love things like Silly Goose Press, who are like, no, there's value in the happy and there's value in the silly.
yeah,
So kill your darlings.
sure.
Again, yes, be cutthroat in editing and
But
challenge your characters, but yeah.
unlike the Disney that we knew growing up,
Hmm.
you don't, not every protagonist has to be Bambi. Like they can
Yeah.
have a happy childhood. They don't need their parents
Yes.
to be
Oh my
dead for them to
God.
go on a quest.
Yes. Yeah. Side note, have you seen there's like discussion happening of like when we were growing up, it was, oh, Aladdin, he, is the rags to riches story and whatever else. And now everything is like existential crisis. It's, oh, Riley has to understand how to have panic attacks and work through anxiety. And it's like, where's Jafar turning into a giant snake? Like, can't we just fight that instead?
Yeah, I mean, like, I definitely think those were,
Yeah.
subtler metaphors. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
having a
Yeah.
distance of like this is what it's like to feel
Uh-huh.
this way, but now it's like no, we're
Right. Yeah.
we're going in deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like back in the day, we could have the discussion of like, oh, Jasmine doesn't understand like what her privilege gets her as a princess and blah, 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 whatever. And like now it would have to be hammered through so clearly, like just everything's very explicit nowadays of like we're all fighting inner demons. It's like, can we fight pretend demons too? Speaking of which, because my child is obsessed with Monsters Inc., I could write a fucking dissertation on how it is a perfect film, masterful art of storytelling. Like Monsters Inc., there is not a single wasted pixel. Every single thing is building character, building scene, moving the plot forward. Like it is mind blowing how tight this movie is for a fucking children's movie. And it's only because I've seen it 50,000 times now, but like Monsters
That's a
Inc. is a
good movie.
goddamn
That's a good movie for
masterpiece.
her to like.
It 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 opens in the trial scare room, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the opening scene to establish why they're scaring kids, the fact that there's a shortage, the fact that Mr. Waternoose is sketchy, like so it sets up all of that. But then we know that there's a fucking simulation room. So then later on, when they use that room to catch Mr. Waternoose, it's like it's a fucking Chekhov's gun in a Pixar movie.
Any other
How many more
piece
pieces of advice that are bad?
again, like none of these are bad
Yeah.
pieces of advice. I think it's just they need
Yeah.
a little more.
Yes. Well, I think they need nuance. Everything in writing needs nuance. This is not math. This is not 2 + 2 = 4 forever and always, no matter what you do, what like there's everything in writing has a bit of nuance, has a bit of wiggle room.
Mhm.
And I think that that's what makes it so fun, but I also think that's what scares people about it so much.
There is one piece of advice that I will
Hmm.
always, always say is definitely something that you should follow
Okay.
is read as much as you can. That's
Yes.
the best way to learn is read books, see how
Hmm.
they're writing sentences, see how they're building
Hmm.
scenes, see how they're making characters because you'll see
Yep.
there's a bunch of different books and they do it in a bunch of different ways.
Hmm.
And you'll find what works for you. You'll find your style. You'll have styles like Pat Conroy that you really love, but that's not your style.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But
Hmm.
kind of like read everything. I'm sure there's other things you've learned from Pat
Hmm.
Conroy that you
Oh,
can use in your own
absolutely.
writing. So like,
Yep.
just shop around, look at all the books,
Hmm.
find out what's
Yep.
possible. Because there's a lot of stuff that like I'll read a
Hmm.
book, like Gideon the Ninth. I'll read that book.
Hmm.
The second book, Harrow the Ninth, is like there's stuff in that book that I was like, I did not know You were allowed to do that. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Are you kidding
Yeah.
me? And I
Hmm.
would never have thought of any of that if I had not read those books.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the thing that you have to think about is like, I wouldn't trust a chef who doesn't love food, who doesn't eat other people's food, who doesn't enjoy exploring new cuisines and trying new things and whatever else. I'm not going to trust a writer who doesn't enjoy partaking in reading, you know? There is a really sad true story about a guy who had three daughters and he heard a message from God, whatever, that they were going to be one of the like most prolific
Oh
bands
yeah, yeah.
ever. Right, exactly. And like literally locked them in the house, forced them to record all this music, but they never listen to music. So it's just weird noise. And I think that's the same thing. Like if you are not actively not just reading in your genre, but specifically reading out of your genre, of expanding what you understand about writing,
Hmm.
like your writing is just going to be nonsense on a page because it can't be in conversation with anything else.
Just read books however you
Hmm.
want to, though. You can read them on Kindle, you can, or
Oh my
note
God,
to reread them,
audiobooks.
or audiobooks. I hate people who say like if you're reading books by
I know.
audiobook, you're not really reading. Yes, you are.
I just
Because
want
one
to
of
be like,
the
what about blind people? Like, what about blind people?
let's
Are
be
they just not
inclusive.
reading? Yeah.
Dumb. But
Yeah.
like I think a lot can be learned. I think definitely, even if you're not like an audiobook reader, I definitely think
Hmm.
spend some time listening to audiobooks because one of the
Hmm.
really good, helpful things when you're editing is to read your work out loud.
Yes.
And and at that point, if you want to know how it's supposed to sound when it's out loud, you need to
Hmm.
have the comparison of an audiobook to hear like
Absolutely.
how sentences flow correctly and when they're spoken.
Yep. Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Um, yeah. There's there's so much that we have worked to unlearn, and I know that there's going to be so much that we continue to have to unlearn. But I'm really glad that we talked about this topic because it was just really, really bothering me when it came to my students and like remembering that all these pieces of advice, they come from a good place and they're a great starting point, but then trying to break out of them and
Yeah.
expand is where the challenge comes.
I think for me, when I'm given something, I like to understand the why. So like show, don't tell.
Yes.
Why do we say that? So
Yes.
I think like that's helpful too. It's just like if
Hmm.
you have a hard piece of advice, if it's
Hmm.
even if it's something that you want to follow, just you have to understand why it's been given, why people say that,
Absolutely.
for you to
Yep.
make the
Yeah.
decision of how to use it.
I'm Abigail.
And I'm Maddie, and this has been
Two writers.
Many Wrongs.